everything is created. Everything has a beginning, a middle and an end. So therefore God must have a beginning, a middle and an end. That is the premise. Hello you gorgeous little beggars and beggarettes. How are you doing? Today I'm talking about God. It's going to be the whole video about God and where God came from. I'll tell you all about it on the other side. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I certainly have, that I've been talking about God a lot. Never in my whole life have I been so focused on God. And it isn't as though I know what I'm talking about. It's just, I've got to say it. I've got to talk about it. Before we start, let me tell you a little story about a student that goes up to the guru and he says, "Guru, it is true that you said that talking about God is useless because God is the unknowable. In fact, as soon as you start talking about God, you are making an error in what you say because nobody knows what God is like. Nobody can ever know. And nobody can ever talk about God in a knowing way." And the guru smiled at him and he said, "Yes, that is true. And yes, that's what I've been saying." So the student looked at him wryly and said, "So why is it that you talk about God all of the time?" And the guru smiled and he said, "You see that bird in the tree? Why is that bird singing? It's not singing because it's got an affirmation to make. It's singing because it's got a song to sing." And that, I suppose, is why we talk about things that we don't know. I talk about God not because I know what that is, but I just like doing it. I just sing my song. And so I thought I'd put that to the emissaries. You know, it's thanks to them that I talk about God. I never would do that before. I had a terrible relationship with God, as if I could say that. My relationship with God was terrible. It was. I didn't like God because of the God that I thought God was. And then I discovered that God wasn't that God. In fact, that was something else. Made by man, and all of the things that God of the Old Testament did just look like things that bad men do. No, the God that I talk about is the nice one. The God that wants the very best for us. And so I said that to the emissaries. I talk about God a lot now, thanks to you guys. And you know what it was? It was strange. They kind of went off on one with me. Not in a bad way, but they give me a bit of a diatribe. And they kind of went into this flow, which I'll tell you about. And they said, and that's because without God, there is no meaning to life. And our only purpose is to connect to the divine. And they talked about the difference between the duality that we have here, this idea of duality, which is we're all separate. Everybody's separate. And then the singularity, which is we're all one. Either we're separate or we're one. What the emissaries were saying was that all of us are one. And the only purpose in our life is to come to that conclusion, to that realization, to that knowing. And they give me the metaphor of being on a life support machine. They said that the only way that we can connect to life is if we connect to God. And without that connection, we're dead. Even though we might be walking around, we might be doing the do, but it's like they showed me a fish, dead fish, the eye, like dead. There's nothing going on inside. And they said, and our job, the emissary's job, is to help people to reconnect back to God. Said that's why we were given the name the Emissaries of God, and that's why we wouldn't allow you to change the name, because I did try and force them to take the word God out of the name. I mean, I would have been happy with emissaries. It sounds a bit like, woo, emissaries, you know, a bit biblical. But I was hoping to get them to drop the word God, and they said, no, we're not, because we've been sent by God, and therefore that is why we're called the Emissaries of God. And they said, we're called that so that you know who sent us. And our message is to show you where you've come from, who you are, and where you're going to. That was what they said. And it was like this big long sermon that they give me about God. Obviously, it was a very important subject for them. And I suppose it's a very important subject for me too. Which leads me to a wonderful question that I think the person in YouTube, they call, I think it's Mouse Nation, the name. Anyway, they asked the question, so where is God from? Who made God? Basically, who made God was the question. And it was a very genuinely asked question. It wasn't like, because the people who don't believe in God, that's their favourite. So who made God then? Yeah, because it's like got you. It's okay that we believe that everything came from nothing. That before, is there any difference in saying, so who made God? And so what was the before the Big Bang? There's no difference, except that they want us to believe that something came from nothing. And all that we want to do is believe that something came from something. Which one has more sense to it? That's my question. Which one sounds more sensible? Something came from something, or something came from nothing? However, nothing really is something, eh? It's like that story of the guru that says to the student, if you want to follow me and learn from me, you're going to have to drop what you're carrying. And the student says, but I'm not carrying anything. I'm carrying nothing. And the guru says, exactly, drop the nothing. And the student says, but that's impossible to drop it. And the guru says, okay then, take it with you. So nothing can be something. Okay, but the question is, who made God? Everything is created. Everything has a beginning, a middle and an end. So therefore, God must have a beginning, a middle and an end. That is the premise. Except it's a faulty premise. And so I'll tell you what the emissary said to me. What they said is that it's a faulty premise to say that because everything has a beginning, a middle and an end, therefore God must. And what they said is that if somebody creates something, like for example, the game of Monopoly. Imagine somebody creates the game of Monopoly. And as they create it, then what they say is, oh, bummer. Now I'm going to have to live in Park Lane for the rest of my life. Now I'm going to have to pass go every time. Well, no, that's not what this is about. They create the game and the game has the rules. But they're not beholden to those rules. They're outside of the game. It's just a creation that they've made. They've created all of that, those rules and the little tickets that you've got to have and the money and stuff like that. But the person who created it doesn't have to abide by the rules of Monopoly in their life. Exactly the same for God. Why should we assume that the rules and laws that God imposed on our realm are the rules and laws that he lives by? That wouldn't make any sense. In fact, if you have the ability to create something so detailed, then you must be outside of those limitations. You see, we have been born into a beginning, a middle and an end. Everything we see, the law of chaos, everything falls into disrepair. However, one thing that we have been told is that energy cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed. So where did the energy come from? Why do we not say, so where did the energy come from then? The Big Bang. So where did the Big Bang come from? Well, it's exactly the same story with where did God come from? If energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed, then maybe that's what God is. Maybe God isn't beholden to the rules that we have here. Maybe God has always been here. I don't know. I mean, there are lots of theories, about God. There are lots of theories about our God is not the top God, and that there are other gods above that. I don't know. I have not got a clue. And, it doesn't either resonate with me or not. I don't know. I really don't know. But I'm not that interested, because what I'm interested in is my relationship with the one that affects me. If there's something beyond that, well, let there be something beyond that. But I often wonder why people speculate so much about these kind of things. I think there are 7 layers of God and all of that. And, nobody knows. But it's like I heard somebody say, so many people spend so much time wondering about whether there's life after death, and yet they don't know what to do on a Sunday afternoon. And I think sometimes it's easier to spend time speculating on things that we'll never know than actually focusing on the stuff that we have to do. So if God did have a beginning and was made, then some other force made God. And so the same question is, well, if God was made, who made the force that made God? And therefore, who made the force that made God? Who made that force? And it can go on like Russian dolls forever. There's no end to it. And you end up in this never-ending loop because most people have had problems actually just coming to terms with the existence of God. And I suppose we've always had this fascination about where things came from. The theory of evolution is the most bizarre theory ever. I mean, it's the most ridiculous theory. When I was watching a program on a new thing narrated by the guy who plays God. I can't remember his name now, but he often plays God, and he was narrating this thing, and they were talking about dinosaurs, right? To a detail that was incredible, like the way that the cry that they made, and how they called to the mate, and how the shape of the nostrils created a certain sound. I'm saying, wow, the things we know. It's incredible what we know about dinosaurs when all that we found are bits of petrified stone. And like the theory of evolution, that we came from, beings from the sea that crawled out of the sea and everything just evolved. And then you think, okay, then super, if it evolved, why do we not see any animals evolving now? Why do we not see any animals partially evolved? Does that mean that evolution started, went through a process and then stopped, and evolution has stopped now? We should see zillions of beings partially evolved, but we don't. But it doesn't matter. That's like, well, don't think about that. Just listen to what we're saying. And so we've got all these questions and no answers. And I think that might be on purpose. The whole idea of us is just coming down here with no knowledge and just having to, our job is to see through the fantasy of this existence, just to see that it's fantasy. And so when you discover that it's just all fantasy, you don't really want to have to ask that many questions about it. Like, you imagine you're in a video game and you're in a room and you start going, yeah, but what's behind that wall? And that door, who made that door? And you're like, that's not important. You're just in a video game. Don't ask so many questions. And I think that's what we've got to do, is get to a place where we just realise that actually, it isn't real anyway. So let's not take it too seriously. And maybe God's not even real in the way that we perceive God. I don't know. But I do know that when I was asking questions to the emissaries about these kind of things, they said, that's just not the right question. Telling me off. They said, the right question you should be asking is, who am I? That's it. And I think that's the key of all of this. It's less questions about the external and more questions that lead you within. Because when we go in within, that's when we find God, if he exists. So let me know in the comments your opinions on God. And I know there are lots of different opinions about what God is. Is it AI? Is it an alien? Whatever. I'll be interested to know. I love you all, and I'll speak to you all later.